School Planning Committee meeting of Wednesday, December 12th, 2018. I was actually informed that I'm supposed to say this meeting is being recorded for the public. So this meeting is being recorded for the public and will be available through ECAT. The first item on our agenda tonight is to approve the minutes of November 28th, 2018. Can I have any questions or comments on those minutes? And if not, may I have a motion to approve? So moved. Have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you. The next item on our agenda, I'm just about there.
Yeah.
Okay. Is to an overview of the educational program and the space summary. So I'm gonna let you guys start us. And just as a reminder that the educational program piece is something that we will vote to recommend at on our next agenda. So.
Don't mind me, I'm going to sit at the Lucas table. So basically, the MSBA requires, for those that don't know, educational program, and this is basically a narrative. Goes through 17 different categories that describe how the school works now, what our proposed changes, and what are the goals for how it will work in the future. So these are the 17 categories that I'll go through each one. And what I wanted to do, everyone's been sent a copy of the educational program. So what I'll do is just go through and walk through each section and just get some highlights. So if I start with the very first piece, which is the vision. There's a lot that went into the vision for those of you, most of you know, or were part of it. And we went through a process where we took a look at goals and objectives, and had a broad cross-section from the community, business, parents, teachers, and took a look at what's working well in the schools now, what should continue, what some of the challenges were, and ultimately it manifested itself into, there are many things to look at in the educational vision, but the primary pieces are the guiding principles and the design patterns. So up to the left, this is an excerpt from the educational program, also from the vision, that describes some of those guiding principles and design patterns. But highlighted in orange, if I had to distill it myself into what are the high-level things that are focusing on for the vision of the school, it's certainly to have a scaled, age-appropriate facility, one that's very flexible and adaptable, one that's green schools, sustainable, as well as high performance and very effective in its use of air, thermal, light, acoustic quality. One that's very much connected to the community as well to the outdoors. Those to me would be the high level. I'm sure there are many more that we can get into deep. The grade level configuration pretty much remains the same. It's a pre-K2 school, but the idea here is to create pre-K, and grade 1 to 2 clusters, so that no matter what size the school is, the kind of zones within the school can break down the scale further. As far as there is a formal policy for the school committee, what is articulated in the educational program are the goals, which are a maximum of 15 students in pre-K classrooms, 18 in kindergarten classrooms, which pretty much matches the MSBA, and then grade 1 to 2, 20 students. I'll just highlight that MSBA's default is 23. We've seen a number of communities that target smaller. Planning and count of classrooms is based on performance. And so that will still be discussed with the MSBA, somewhat negotiated, but that will need to meet the goals. The school scheduling, probably the highlight here, we are planning K and K. That doesn't mean day one that you're going to full day, but we are planning for it. So we're planning the number of rooms and spaces that can accommodate full day. As far as the teaching methodology and structure, there's really a lot under this category. One of the highlights, if we think about administration, within the structure of the new school, what the program talks about having kind of and grade 1 to 2 administration areas. So that's something that we're looking to combined, so if it was just a school project, obviously there would be no need to split the administration up. At pre-K2 level, they're primarily self-contained classrooms. Of course, we all know that. We just leave for specials. The core academic classrooms, what's articulated in the ed program, is that it needs to accommodate full group and small group, a lot of varied learning, that it integrates response to intervention, as well as STEM, or science, technology, engineering. I put M in parentheses because that's the way it's sort of written in the ed program. And of course, fully integrated technology and connections to outdoors and outdoor learning. As far as guidance and support service, programs are expected to continue and they're accommodated. I would say that we can certainly remedy a number of things in providing dedicated space for all the different counselors and needs within schools, so that's something that's expressed as well. As far as teacher planning rooms, we know that there is a need for meeting and professional development space. And fortunately, we have a library and media center, a certain amount of square footage that's allocated for the new schools where you don't have that luxury now. So a lot of the square footage we have for the media center can be used in a variety of ways. We're seeing media centers now more flexible, agile, used for professional development, for meeting space, for even maker and activity space. So it is articulated that need for the meeting and professional development space. Pre-kindergarten and kindergarten, really a lot that's written in here is very similar to the core academics as far as whole and small group and integrating RTI and technology and outdoor learning. The ed program also goes on to describe the different zones within these classrooms that are needed. Lunch programs, right now you have more than 2 seatings. The MSBA's default is 2, and what's written into the program is to plan to accommodate 2 or half the population at any given time, so that yields certainly a larger space and more flexible space for the other activities that would happen in the material. There's also a description of how the community might use for technology and media center. There's a lot written throughout the ed program about needing robust technology, modern technology, supporting makerspace, and also a support center within the school, and of course community access to that space as well. For visual, performing arts, and physical education, really the highlight here is, wow, you'll have dedicated space for all these programs that you don't necessarily have now. And the gymnasium, of course, would be large, full-size, standard gymnasium. It's pretty much what the MSBA allocates for students. Special education, what's written into the ed program is very detailed, it's very specific to Easton. We see this in every community. And it includes such things as co-teaching and the need for small group and sensory space throughout and easily accessible to classrooms. For transportation, what's described here as maybe a change or improvement is to separate bus and car circulation and emphasize safe walking routes into the school. As far as functional relationships, the spaces that should be next to each other in the school, the ed program describes zoning for pre-KK and grade 1, 2. So having a breakdown within the school, whether it's the small school or certainly if it's a larger school, to break it down into zones. Within those zones, to further have a scale breakdown into neighborhoods of learning. And then certainly to organize the school so it has shared and community space within it. Security and visual access. We know the emphasis here is to create a welcoming and joyful school with small communities, to create good visibility, natural surveillance, controlled access, and layers of lock-on. So there's a lot more detail to come on safety and security, but the focus is in the right place. So that's an overview of kind of what's in the program. There's a lot more detail, but these I would say are the highlights.
So we did receive this beforehand, know if people had comments or feedback or questions or areas where they needed more information or clarification. I don't know if you want to, and just on a note, huge thanks to members of the educational leadership team, to members of the community who volunteered to participate in all of our visioning sessions, and to members of the central office who actually put all of those pieces together into what is a very, very comprehensive educational program. I don't know if you want to share your quick comment that you made to me about the program in terms of.
Oh, sure. I see a lot of ed programs, and I would have to say, in all honesty, and without trying to make anybody blush, that this is one of the better ones that I've seen. It's very complete. It addresses, probably in the first wave, very specifically what the MSBA is looking for and what exists now, what are the proposed changes, what are the goals for the future, and sometimes it's the MSBA iterations of feedback to get that aligned correctly. There's no guarantee the MSBA is constantly changing what they want to see, but I think this was.
So do people have comments or questions? Go ahead.
Jane will know that I'm the person who goes down into petty grammatical issues. But, and I actually did not examine.
Could you talk up a little bit, Caroline?
Sorry. Okay, so on page 18, under remedy for the special for the deficiencies in that we found in the coordinated program, this is purely just a clarification in the way the sentence runs. Under remedy, review of staff schedules to adjust to delivery times and locations for all students for IEPs. I think it is supposed to be IEP. To receive special, and it's just this. I think it's one of those things that it involves IEPs, and then it says to receive, but something skipped. So I think it's all students take away that apostrophe.
Or pluralize IEP.
Or,
Or
And that's on IEP.
yeah,
you got that?
Yeah, I made a note too.
so page 20 under bridges. Oh yeah, the math.
Where are you? Bridges, math program.
Yeah, there is. Okay, Bridges math program is the primary teachers process. Bridges supports the math, SE, mathematical collaboration and application, as well as our mathematics frameworks. You're saying Bridges also supports our frameworks? I just want to make sure that's what that sentence is meant to say. It's not. Sorry. Okay.
Supports the implementation of framework.
So you got that too now? Yep. Anybody else? Questions, comments?
Wait.
Sorry. I should know better.
Well, this is only a few. This is, yeah, on page 1. Paragraph currently all way to school requirements that are used by the entire school community. So technically, the way that sentence reads is like that all BK2 schools are used as opposed to. So I would say outdoor gardens are used if that was the intent. Yes. That are used by the app. So I would just say have outdoor gardens that are used. Does that make sense? And the last is page 22. Clusters. Okay, so you kind of swap back and forth calling it schools, and obviously what is meant is clusters, and that is functional and special.
And spatial relationships.
Yeah, there would be a pre-K separate playground. Okay, each school would have separate outdoor play spaces. I think you need each cluster, right? Pre-K 2 and 1, 2. It's not
really a
each school
school.
applies, there are 2 schools. And you do correct that later where it's separate administrative offices for, well, again, it says for the K to K school and grade 1 and 2 school, but there aren't really two schools, they're clusters. I mean, we're envisioning it.
So you just want the language to be consistent
We're
throughout.
calling them, there are each of those pods or whatever, sections. Okay, sorry. That's-
Don't apologize, no.
It's
Anybody
fine.
else, comments, questions, feedback?
I have a question on page 3. Under the top where it says continuous improvement. The second sentence starts with strive for continuous improvement. Center School celebrates the progress it has made through our reading intervention model. Through tiered instruction, we have made great gains in the reading success for all students. Center School embraces inclusion, where teachers collaborate to provide differentiated instruction within the regular education classroom. Is this specific for Center School, or is it a program that is being offered at all 3 schools?
It is a program for all 3 schools.
I think because this education program is about the center school, that's why it's not on the center.
Is that correct? Or are we supposed to put all 3 schools?
To the MSBA, that would be unnecessary information, but it may be for those who can't, members of the community, you know.
Okay, thank you.
To me, it seemed like it was specific and solely focused on Center School. The other question I have is on page 7. The bullet proposed changes in why, or statements that no changes proposed, the second paragraph under that. The reason is that the needs of the students entering, beginning of the paragraph. There is also a proposal before the union to eliminate 3-day pre-K. The reason is that the needs of the students entering have been increasing at such a rate that more and more have been recommended for 4 and 5-day services. Or is that based on less more curiosity than anything else? Are they saying that the students, the pre-K students coming in, need more attention that they're not getting at home? Or
No, it's, so the pre-K program we have right now is a special education program. And we have had 3-day, 4-day, and 5-day programs. We don't feel that we have clear-cut criteria to differentiate between 3-day and 4-day. Because of the needs of the students that are coming in, another day of school is what we're finding most of the children would benefit from at this time. It has nothing to do with something they're not getting at home. It's just that the targeted instruction for their particular needs. The reason some children don't get 5 days is because developmentally it may be inappropriate for them to be in school 5 days. But the difference between 3 and 4 for socialization is negligible, but for the added academic benefit, we find that it makes a difference. So we're recommending 4 and 5-day programs instead of 3, 4, and 5.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else? So, I know that we need to talk about the space summary as well, but can we maybe take a vote to recommend this right now? If you have no more questions or comments or feedback? So what we're doing is we are recommending this to go to the school committee so that they can review and approve it. Because this is one component of of our submission that the MSBA requires school committee approval on. And if I recall, this is the only component that they require specific school committee approval on. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct. They do also require
At the end.
representatives to approve the entire submission.
Right. Okay. So, may I please have a motion to recommend the educational program to the school committee for their approval? Please. So moved. Can I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
I want to be sure to acknowledge Chrissy Pruitt's efforts in this educational plan. She did many passovers to make sure that as many of these corrections were minimized as possible. So she put a tremendous amount of work into this.
Thank you. So now, we're gonna jump back to the space summary.
Can I just
Yeah, go
interject?
ahead, yeah.
Okay. So when the traffic expert was here, the traffic engineer had spoken to us about collecting more information, and I was hearing a consensus that people were very curious about the implications of traffic. But because we're trying to be fiscally responsible at this point, we're holding back on doing a more detailed analysis because a site hasn't yet been chosen. However, a cost-free opportunity to perhaps get a little more information for the expert was given to us to provide the survey. So we took into consideration the questions that everybody had brought up, and then we sent it out, and the expert gave us a few more to add. We would just like it if you could just look it over and give us an idea if you think this is ready to go, if you can think of any other questions that might be helpful in the survey, and if it's fine, we can send that out and then report the results back to you and to the expert. Hopefully, maybe it's a little bit more of a picture of the transportation of our family.
We do have a little bit of a traffic update, so we've had our landscape architect and traffic engineer collaborating together based on findings so far.
So potential impact study won't be done until after the location is chosen.
The full traffic analysis?
Yeah. You say full, but I mean anything.
You mean the
Any
whole
potential impact
campus?
won't be revealed to us until after school.
We have a little bit more information today.
Okay.
It'll give you a little, it's a little bit towards what you were asking about at the last meeting. So let's get there, and then
Sure.
then we can back up and see where we're at with that. So answering that question fully.
Are the surveys going around? All right. Questions, comments?
Just on number 6, sorry. Grades 9 to 12, you come on and walk right across the high school, of course, we know that grade 12, grade 11, kids drive themselves. I don't know if that's, I don't know.
For that, for parking purposes, how many kids are gonna be out there parking, is that what you're trying?
Say, what does your child drive herself?
Yeah, I guess our thinking on that was, well, that would be good information. It's not, it would be good information. We were thinking, as we try to collect a little bit more information about what's happening in the campus, about the vehicular circulation through.
Okay, right.
We're not
Just
capable
park.
of providing more parking spaces under this project for the high school, but I guess it's still good information.
You may want to just put it down there just so it doesn't get inadvertently marked. The child drives themselves,
Right.
just so they don't
That's
mark
a good
drive to mistakenly give you the wrong data. I think you'll collect that data or do anything with it, but just differentiate the.
So, is somebody going to get that question? Lisa, do you have that?
Yes, I do.
Because it was just for folks, it was Lynn who was, Dr. Cabral's administrative assistant who put this together for us, so. So once we add that question, are we comfortable with sending this out? This will go to the entire school community. Pre-K to 12, right? Well, really beyond, but.
Yes.
Good? Right.
Okay, so
Back to the space summary.
I'll move on to the space summary, and forgive the text, it's just we're on a different computer, so it's freaking havoc. What you have in front of you is a space summary. It really is identical to the one that was handed out at the last meeting. We changed a few footnotes, really. So it's not substantively different, but I thought I'd bring the update. It is version 7. It's what we usually ask, although it's not a requirement of the MSBA, that there is acknowledgement that along with the educational program, the space summary represents those needs in calculable form. So I'll walk through it, and we usually kind of have them available as part of the what's being.
And I'm going to interrupt just for people who, all our avid viewers. Remind us of what the space summary is, what it translates from the ed program into actual square footage.
Sure.
Right?
So the space summary is basically a spreadsheet. It's an MSBA form. They have a number of columns that include tracking what the existing square footage is. And square footage, I mean every space in the school is, what type of it is, and how big it is, and then what the overall size of the school is. So there's what we call net square footage, which are all the individual rooms, various categories, then the gross square footage, which is the outside perimeter of the school, times however many floors it is. So the MSBA, as you can imagine, has created this document so that we can record what exists now, what is being proposed, and then what their guidelines are. And actually, that's what I'll walk through. This first image that I've got up on the screen shows you. They don't usually have this many columns, but because we're talking about 3 schools and the possibility of a single center school project or a combined school project, we've had to create a lot of extra columns. But the first 4 that are of various colors, blue, green, yellow, and red, are where we track the existing square footages for all the different schools. So blue, green, and yellow are the individual schools. Red would be the combined total. The next set of columns that are just yellow and red are the proposed. So those are the 2 projects we're talking about. We're talking about yellow, which would be the center school project, all its spaces, or the red, which would be a combined school project. So for comparative purposes, you can see what exists now and what's being proposed. On the far right, there are a set of columns that are the MSBA guidelines, and I'll caution that the way the MSBA initially gauges square footage is at the very bottom of their spreadsheet. You can enter the enrollment, and in this case we have 2 different sizes. We have 235 student enrollment for center, and we have 760 for a combined school, both not including pre-K. And the MSBA spreadsheet backfills all the spaces you'll need. So it's based on a lot of assumptions, but it'll tell you, it starts to tell or describe how many classrooms, of a certain size, how many science rooms, or how big the library should be. That MSBA column, which are their guidelines, is effectively a default. It doesn't mean it's what you get or the only thing that you should build. In fact, it doesn't do a lot of things. For example, it won't put in pre-K enrollment. So we have to manually put in pre-K enrollment and calculate the number of rooms that are needed for pre-K. It is built on a lot of assumptions, such as the model here is for a grade K to 7 school. And you might say, why does that, K to 6 school, why does that matter? Well, if 1/6 of your rooms need to be kindergarten, that's very different than if you're pre-K to 2 school, where 1/3 of your enrollment needs to be kindergarten classroom. So there are a number of things in here that, it's not intended to be what you get, it's just intended to be a sort of a default to which we have to justify or prove why spaces are needed differently. So I think that explains what the overall document is. It's an awful lot of numbers and square footages, and I'm just going to step us through some of the highlights. I know this may be a foreign form to some or something you're not familiar with, but if I just start with the first category, the MSBA has a number of categories. The green bars that go horizontal are their program categories, so it starts with core academic spaces. So that's basically your typical classrooms. It's pre-K, kindergarten, general classrooms from grade 1 to 2, and any associated spaces. So right now, as I had described, we have greater needs than the MSBA's default. So in the center school only, we actually are finding that we need about 8,000 more square feet of classroom space for academics than MSBA's default. A lot of that is because they don't have pre-K factored in. If it's a combined school, it's about 20,000. So we have added pre-K. The enrollment, which still needs to be vetted through the MSBA, is 115, and that's based on what the current pre-K enrollment is, what the trend is to age in throughout the year. So as students become of age, they age into the school. And then also the small waiting list, or the waiting list that exists now. The idea is to provide full-day pre-K and to clear the waiting list and to meet those needs as we see. So that's where the number 115 comes in. As I had mentioned, we also adjusted under core academics so that it's for a K-2 school, not a K-6 school, so that determines different number of kindergarten rooms, and that explains some of the overage. Standard classroom is about 950 square feet. Standard kindergarten room is 1,200 square feet, so there's a lot more square footage needed if it's calculated correctly. And then the other thing is that we've adjusted for the target class size. So I had mentioned earlier that the MSBA default is 23 students per room. We've adjusted it so it accounts for 20 students per room. So all of those culminate under core academics. Next category down is special education. In this one, the MSBA really just defaults to some average that was really a snapshot in time, maybe a decade ago. But it's based on about an 8%, I think, special education enrollment, based on some model that was around when they first created this. What we do is we look at the special education needs you have now. We start from the ground up and we calculate the number of spaces, the types of things that are happening in the rooms to determine the types, sizes of spaces that you need. So this is very custom built for what we're proposing is custom built for Easton. The MSBA also acknowledges and defers to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for approval. So they don't tend to create a guideline or a standard. It really falls under different jurisdictions. So they just shepherd the information over to the DESE. So here we're about 1,000 square feet larger than the MSBA default in a center school, about 2,000 square feet larger for a combined school model. Those are really the only changes. There's one at the bottom, but if I go through the next several categories, art, music, health, PE, media center, CAF, kitchen, medical, which is nurse, admin, guidance, custodial, we're pretty much aligning with the MSBA standards. And that's, whenever we can, that's prudent. I'll point out a few highlights that we already mentioned. The cafeteria is being sized for half of the enrollment. That's for 2 seatings, and that's again what the MSBA default is. Under admin and guidance, we are matching the MSBA's allowance, if you will, but we know from the educational program that there's a desire to have distinct administration areas, so we've been able to take the square footage and divide it into those 2 administration areas, and it seems suitable. This is also not the last time that we'll all look at the space summary together. The last category is called Other. This is for anything unique to the district that maybe the MSBA doesn't have a category for. They may or may not support the square footage under this. But what we heard a lot through the visioning and what is written into the educational program is to try to make substantial community connections, not just the use of space, but to maybe have dedicated space. So we've allocated 1,200 square feet, which is about the size of a kindergarten room or a large science lab, as a community room. That might be a senior center, that might be just a community room itself. The idea is that it may have its own access, but that after hours, maybe on weekends, that there may be a whole bunch of adjacent spaces that that community room can connect to and use without having maybe the whole school open, for example. So it's what I've been coining an overlay of the maybe senior center or an overlay of a community center where outside, during the school hours, there is a room that can be utilized separately, but then after hours, there's a whole bunch of spaces, portions of the library, cafeteria, that may form a larger community use. So that's really it on the space summary. A formal vote's not needed, but it's just, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Why is there no comparison with Parkview
Parkview is in here,
or proposed?
because that is not within the scope of the study. So the scope of the study that the MSBA has outlined and that we've been hired to look at is a center school or a combined school that includes the equivalent of Monroe, Parkview, View, and Centers enrollment. So there isn't a separate Monroe or separate Parkview.
Wait, don't you have mock-ups for Parkview?
We have base repair spending costs.
And
We don't need a space summary to provide that.
Okay.
It'd be your proposal, so that column there could be, so the site is,
Okay.
no matter
Because
where.
every other document I've seen, there's side by side.
And when we pull up
And then
our
this
document at the end, we will have a cost showing it.
Yeah, we thought for the sake of the community getting a full picture that we'd color outside the lines and at least provide that information, even though it's not a formal part of the project, but just to say, you know, if those schools were to be done later,
Mhm.
you know, how much square footage would you need, what would the cost be? So,
Good. I'm gonna suggest we move on to update on the site planning options, pros and cons.
Okay, so, yeah, that's great. So we have a few modest updates to what we call the matrix for all of the options that are on the table right now, pros and cons. We heard feedback at the last SPC meeting, so I believe we've incorporated all of those comments as to list as pros and cons. I wasn't gonna go through all of the detail, except to maybe note a few things. I think there was discussion about septic, which we've noted as, we don't have a determination yet, but we've noticed that as a pro or a con that we certainly can utilize the existing septic plant, and remains to be seen what additional leaching field would be required. There was some mention about maybe getting a little bit more information on play space and the pros and cons of that, what are the guidelines, and I'll about to show some updates on what our landscape architect has come up with. There were also a few additional questions about traffic, and although we don't have, as we said, the full traffic study, what we do have in this first phase are traffic observations and professional judgment on what's required to kind of generally handle the load of traffic. And it gives us a gauge for each one of these options to say, you know, whether there will be a manageable solution or whether there will be a substantial impact or whether there will be a modest impact. So I think you can see in gray under traffic at the bottom, the options have been categorized. I think both of the center school options, center school only on the center school site, whether it's new or ad reno, we're suggesting would have modest traffic improvements. And the thinking there is that we certainly have options to connect to School Street or not, but certainly to bring more cars off of the street and have them queue on site. So there should be some at least modest level of improvements that can be provided. We can see that if on the center school site we had a combined school model, there was a lot of red, and we think that there would be major traffic impacts. We do not think that we can pull the equivalent car queuing off the streets. In fact, it will add to the streets. We also, there are a number of issues with even providing the amount of play space as well as parking space that are required. To my sensibility, the combined options on the center school site are proving not feasible, but it's not up to the architect to suggest whether we proceed forward. We certainly are keeping them on for now. And then I think the combined school, whether it's new or ad reno on the Parkview site, we think that there's manageable traffic. And again, we have some information that we're going to share tonight. We think that in a combined school model, the cumulative amount of car queuing can fit primarily on the site. It certainly fits better when it's new versus ad reno. We think there are also, as our traffic engineer has looked at surrounding roadways, connections that can be made. There are a lot of ways to improve traffic. And again, I'll get to it in a bit, but we also know that the sequencing of when the schools occur and when the traffic spikes are, that the combined pre-K2 school here seems to kind of dovetail and not overlap some of the higher volumes from high school, middle school, or from the Richardson, so grade 3 to 5 traffic. So again, I'll get into more detail, but this is a work in progress. We'll be back next week, and we're hoping that either tonight or by the time of the next meeting, people will have a chance to look at this and add or suggest adding additional pros and cons or insights. We're really looking for the things that differentiate or stand out from each one of these options. But happy to again take comments or questions tonight. If any.
Sounds to me like it's so glaring you don't need a study. That's really what I was getting at. I didn't know you had already got there.
Well,
That's
we'll
it,
share
that's
some
everything.
information with you
Yeah.
tonight.
Yeah, no, they didn't really need it.
It
They
was so
figured
physical,
they
so
knew
obvious.
right away, it was obvious that there was gonna be
We're talking about the
Virtual-
traffic on
yeah,
the
virtually
combined
impossible
center
to-
school site.
yeah, to do
Understood.
to make that work.
No, I'm making sure.
So the other highlight from the last 2 weeks is, I think Bob mentioned earlier, is about the plant here on this site. The plant is sized to take, it's about 40,000 gallons, which would take the new, if you did a combined school on this site. The issue is that the leaching, when the addition was done to the middle school, that went on top of one of the leaching areas. So there's not enough leaching area to match up with the plant. There's 26,000 gallons of leaching area for a 40,000 gallon plant, which serves what you have population-wise on this campus. But it won't take a combined population. You have to add to the leaching field. So either add more leaching field somewhere else or add to that existing leaching field to up that number. So
Dave, is that corroborate with what you said last
Yeah,
week?
exactly, yeah, it was built at a certain size, RO was built, took up one of those leaching
Yeah,
fields, so the leaching capacity is reduced.
But the additional cost to do that on this site would be less than the cost to do some, whatever would need to be done on the center school site.
we have to do a little more research on that.
Okay.
That's possible.
That's
why
what
we
you
went
kind of
right
did
down
case
to
last week, correct?
I believe so, I
Last
think,
week. Okay.
yeah, having a wastewater treatment plant
Try to tie
already
it
built.
together.
That's a major expense, the leaching field
Yeah.
is an expense, but the existing wastewater treatment plant seems it's sized appropriately to handle.
Yeah.
That's a big number.
Yeah, one of the key things that's obviously not included yet are the costs, and I think we get some information tonight, but that's also an important piece of this. So anything, if the leaching fields where the septic did cost more on one side or another, we won't break that out separately. It will be included in the bottom line cost differential. Some things may be less and more, but the bottom line would be estimated comparative costs.
But MSBA does not reimburse for septic.
And that'd be
Well, it would be center. We would-
They don't reimburse for any septic. So the difference in price from the center school site and the Parkview site is,
Apples to apples.
it's a big difference, but it's also, neither one is reimbursable. So it's
Right.
not like we would get a portion of either one of those back.
So you can't compare them apples to apples.
Right.
And again, in rough fashion, that would be approximated in the costs when we get to them. They will already factor in what's reimbursable, what's not, to some sort of assumption gross level.
We'll use two different methodologies, so Perkins Eastman will have a total independent estimate, they'll itemize everything to be very living estimate. We're gonna run a check estimate on it using really just cost per square foot data, and we will call out items like that and we'll try to project the district share for each scenario. Because obviously that plays a huge role in that decision as well, so. Two different ways of looking at it, but generally we've done this in Perkins in the past, and we usually reach pretty close to the same number that it took in most of the time. So a lot of school projects with plenty of data out there.
I'm just gonna ask a question on the Parkview site where we talked about the loss of the two softball fields. Is that a loss during construction only, and then once we're done, there is a possibility to add those back on the site? One back on that site?
It's the type of, it's the level of study that we would have to get into kind of in the next stage. But what we are calling out, whenever there's a loss of the softball field, is in parentheses says relocate.
Right.
That it may be possible to do on-site, it may be that former school sites serve well.
Absolutely. I wanted to make sure I was clear about how that affected during and after construction.
That's the same question on the park you said.
Yeah.
They show a lot of green space, but it doesn't indicate whether or not you can actually relocate the softball field.
And I think what might be important is to gauge, you can see the top line shows, say the combined brand new has 186,000 square foot of play space. The target is between 114 and 190, and again, I'm about to get to that, but so it's really a judgment call. Should we put a softball field in and reduce the amount of play space? We have 760 students in pre-K, so we're trying to come up with a measure of what's a reasonable amount of play space preserved. So you may not want to put a softball field back on here. The sheer volume of students, we trade off.
What is it? I don't know if you know, what is a softball field approximately?
Our landscape architect knows. She'll be here next week.
That's fine.
Not too bad. I used to know.
Like how much square
Square
footage,
footage.
square footage.
17,000.
Yeah.
I think it's 17,000.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay,
Literally just one house.
sounds great to me.
Yeah, it's about right.
You can say anything.
It's a little less than. We just put this question, but it's
So we can come back to this. I'm gonna move on because some of the information I've been talking about feeds into the assessment. And again, we don't have our landscape architect here tonight, but based on the last meeting we had, trying to come up with some gauge of play area, and if there are standards or things that we could point to. There are currently no state or nationally recognized formulas for play space needs. There are in Massachusetts. It does dictate that 75 square foot per child for early education care, pre-K, effectively. That's not a lot of space, but that is a minimum that is dictated by the state. So what our landscape architect did was to determine reasonable targets. They did a number of things. They looked at your current pre-K2 schools, all three of them, and looked at how much square feet per student is play as opposed to like softball field or other stuff. And we also combined that with recent elementary school projects where they've gone through the same thing. Every elementary school we work on asks the same question: what are the standards for play? So we're actually trying to get our landscape architect to come up with some standards maybe. It's a tough thing to put down on paper because in honesty, a lot of it is just it's what you're used to, or it's conditional. There are a lot of urban schools that don't have a lot of play, so you hate to say you can't have an urban school because you don't meet a square footage need. That's why there probably are no standards. But there are creative ways to create play, and it's maybe less about square footage than it is about the types of play, the quality of play, and a number of things that go into it.
I'm not obsessing about the softball fields really, but I do have one more question, which is, when you think about play space, it's my assumption that right now, in the back of Parkview, where those two softball fields are, or one, is there one in the back?
Two.
There's two in the back of Parkview. That when kids go out during the day, they play on those softball fields, do they or do they not? Is that part of their, it's been so long since my kids have been at Parkview, but I don't recall if they're actually,
I was walking by yesterday, and they come out the sides, and play in the playground on the side is paved.
Yep.
And then sometimes they do activities out in the grass, which is on, there's a
Yep.
soccer field
Yep.
next to the hard soil.
Yeah.
So they're out there. I don't see them so much out on the far field.
I wondered if Parkview considers those fields part of their play space.
So it's a good segue. I can tell you what we assumed. Because the reality is, if the fields are there, students should and would use them, as long as they're not too far away.
Well, the thing about it being on the main campus also is that other schools can make use of it as well, and not just
Right, not just
Parkview or Center.
Right, because the high school and middle school, their PE classes
Yes.
are
They
often
walk
on that
over there.
softball
Yeah.
field closest to the fire station. The kids walk over from the high school and use
The
that.
team plays there.
And then the teams after
So
school, but during
play
school.
area.
Right.
Oh, absolutely,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely.
That was,
So, yeah,
So
so we're
you-
not really losing.
exactly,
We're
yeah,
not-
I see.
You don't have to sacrifice one for the other, I
Right.
guess is what I'm saying.
Incorporate it into it.
Right.
it makes it certainly a big gray area is what's what's used versus what's needed, but I can say only what our landscape architect did for comparative purposes. They looked at each site and they categorized into structured play, and that can be playground or hardscape, open green space, and then truly dimensional sports fields. And so they included what was structured play or open green space as part of the play area calculations. So on the center school site, there was about 70,000 square feet. It looks like about 270 square feet per student. On the Parkview site, it was 81,600, which is about 263. And then on the Morrell Hall, it was 53,300, which is about 236. So they're not way off from each other, but again, that's not including the large softball field space. But the average blended together would be about 258 square feet per child. If we then look at recent projects, the Zervis Elementary School in Newton, this was actually a very tight site. In this case, it's a little bit different because there were 3 age-level play areas created, and they were actually designed to a capacity. They wanted those designed for 75 students each. So it's almost like a different kind of calculation, and that has to do with the type of play equipment, and I guess there are occupancy ratios, if you will, for what different types of play equipment can accommodate, as well as some associated green space. So in this school, we found that there was about 217 square feet per child allocated in those areas. Another case study is Ipswich Elementary School, who struggled mightily with what are the standards for outdoor play. And here we had a school designed for 776 students, and what was considered the acceptable amount of play area was about 115,000 square feet. So again, it's landing in about 148 square feet per child. So this is just a gut check, but if you put these together, so if we know that the pre-K is based on a state requirement of 55 square feet, and we take the average of the 3 pre-K2 as well as blending in the Zervis School and what we learned at Ipswich, you come up with 100. I put a range in here rather than an exact number of 150 to 250 square feet. If we multiply that by the enrollment of 235, you would get a range of play space in this area, rounded maybe to this. If you include pre-K, it rounds to about that. And same with the combined school, 760 students times that range would yield these numbers, and then if you included pre-K, you're up around this amount. So what that means so far for the options would be that if you rebuilt or renovated the center school on its existing site, no surprise, it seems like it would meet those standards. If you put a combined school on the site, whether it's at reno or new, it really doesn't. You showed yellow rather than red, but you can see that basically we're not meeting the target of 114 to 190. We can only fit about 66,000 square feet of play. Similar with the, this is just ad reno versus new. We jump over to the Parkview site, and both of these are the combined school option. We can see that, again, the range of 114 to 190 square feet. We're within that range where we can fit 186 square feet in renovation. And likewise, we certainly meet it in more, 221 square feet of play if it's a brand new school. It's more efficient use of space. So this was one method that's reasonable. Just like a lot of it is really what you're used to and what the conditions are. It's relative. So looking at that, maybe blending it with a few other examples is just a gut check, not a standard.
So for me, in thinking about it, I think that the quality of the space may be more important than an exact space requirement, because I think you look at Richardson Olmsted, I'm not sure what the space is, but it's a very challenging space for kids to go out to recess. There isn't any green space, it's all blacktop, and what they're able to do at recess is very limited. And I think it's been a challenge for this building. So for me, I don't know about the numbers as much as what will that space look like? Will it be age appropriate? Will it offer a variety of things for kids to do at recess or any outdoor play?
So any one of the options, what is done with the square footage would be similar. It wouldn't be one option would get higher quality than another, so we have to assume that. And that's why we ended up with a range, because it is about quality, what you do, and it's relative to what you're used to, right?
So if I'm looking at the range for the Parkview site, we're talking about, for example, softball fields or whatever it is that the community decides to put there if it's on that site. It looks like, so Walter and Chad just told me that a softball field, for example, is about 19,000 square feet. So with the two options, 186,000 square feet and 221,000 square feet, if you took off 38,000 square feet for two fields, you still fall within the range you identified in both scenarios for play space outside of the softball fields. Am I reading that correctly?
I think so. I'm not doing math anymore today.
Is the parking, can I ask a question? Is the parking included in that site?
Yes, on both of them parking.
So the picture I'm looking at includes parking.
And please understand, this is not a design. These are not designs of the building yet. This is just what will fit on the site, right?
Yeah, so for each one of the sites, they, on this matrix that you have, it'll talk about how much play, but it also talks about under traffic, whether we are meeting the bus and car loop needs as well as the parking.
And what about the services, that come up in the back?
Yeah, that's all factored in, so we're not assuming, we won't discover later we have to take away green space to create service. It's all what we call a test fit or initial study. We draw the road like emergency fire lane around the building, and we don't count that. Service access, parking, so that's all included in the diagram. It's what's left over that we call green space or play space.
Okay, will give you buffer space between Parkview and its nearest neighbors?
Certainly something that would come, any one of these options, the next phase would be where we zoom in closer and look at a lot more detail. But like to figure out if these options are feasible, maybe 2/3 of them are feasible. We then take a closer look and see if some of them are better than others for buffer space and for other addressing community needs and issues.
Yeah, one of the things that did come up in the visioning, just as a reminder, is we really need to be looking at closely traffic, not just kind of immediate traffic, but traffic as it expanded out, and also other impacts to the neighborhoods surrounding those schools. We do recognize that both of those schools have neighborhoods around them, so.
And speed is an issue.
Yep, all of that. Yeah, absolutely. But more detail as we continue moving forward.
So from here, I'll also continue, and one of the other things that was asked at the last meeting was, what more could be done with traffic, and so what we did is we sat with we had a workshop with our landscape architect and traffic engineer and tried to take what they've observed so far and put that into, more substantial solutions. It's not yet looking at the entire campus and trying to solve all the problems, but just trying to say, well, if their combined school does go on the site here at Parkview, can we get a little bit more of an understanding of whether it's manageable and what options we have? So they came up with 3 scenarios that could offer improvements. The first one, scenario 1, so it's pre-study, so this does not include all the traffic information that is yet to come, but what it suggests is that cars would come in and out on Spooner Street. So actually, I think they're full circulation.
So
Comes
down.
around the school and then back out. So that's a large queuing, and a lot of cars off the street. Buses, on the other hand, would come in Columbia, and we're suggesting a connection could be made.
Columbus.
Oh, Columbia, sorry, we were Columbia. So that they would come in. A suggestion is connection is suggested here. This would be buses, more manageable as far as traffic flow. They would drop off, and they would also exit out of Spooner. So that's kind of a starting point. Another thought was to dedicate an actual roadway or lane or boulevard that connected Columbus to the site, so you're actually not going through the existing parking area. And the idea there was that cars again would come in Spooner, but in this case, they would go out to Columbus. Buses would come in Columbus and then exit out Spooner. So this creates, again, a large car queue, separation of buses and cars. There's a lot of detail yet to be worked out, but it seemed to maybe offer improvements, including, to some of the parking lot operations that exist at the school. Another scenario would be a roadway connection from Columbus all the way to Lothrop. And the thought here, there'd be multiple opportunities, but in this case, it's suggesting that cars, again, would come in Spooner and also exit via this roadway to Columbus, or have the option to exit to Lothrop. That could be something decided later, but it could create more options. Buses would come in Columbus and also exit Spooner. So similar car queues, a few more options as far as exiting. This may have the opportunity to improve Richardson-Olmsted circulation and flow as well. But I think what's more important, what we learned when we were looking at this, is really just seeing this as an overall sequence. So they're color-coded here, so you've got the middle school and high school in blue, and you can see the peak traffic times here with a 7:55 start, 2:25 end. So this would be the start, this would be the end. But you can see a large volume. We're talking about in the range of just over 2,000 students being driven or taking buses to the site. So that's a large number. And then if we look at the Richardson-Olmsted Middle School, which really coincides with the pre-K, or pretty close to it, we're talking about 800 students for Richardson-Olmsted and maybe another 150 or so. If you had a combined school, that would be pre-K. So you're talking about a total of about 1,000. So half of the volume that we're seeing at the middle high school times would occur in this time frame. And then even if it were combined school, so we had the K to 2 traffic flow would be separate, and that would range from 300 if it was a single school up to 760. So still even the smallest volume, the way that they're staggered. So the thinking was at a gross level that although, a combined school would introduce more traffic into the area, that they're not necessarily at all compounding each other, and with multiple routes in and the ability to connect in various ways, it's seen as a very manageable situation. Certainly no more volume than is being seen at any one time of arrival or departure. In fact, it would be less than what is seen currently in high school. So that's just again a little bit more kind of thought put into it. It doesn't mean it's a solution, but I think it translates into the matrix that we had, where we tried to get a sense of what is truly problematic, what is modest improvement, what is truly problematic, and what is considered manageable traffic. And our traffic engineer will be here next week with our landscape architect, so we'll dive deeper into some details.
Questions or comments before we move on to, we already talked about play space. And then costing is the next thing we're gonna look at. Technology switch. Lots of technology. is cold in here.
There.
It is wonderful there. What? If it's on AC as opposed to heat.
It's in, I think it's in,
Oh, it's an on.
it's not scheduled on the
It's-
schedule.
It's worked on a computer.
Right.
It's not scheduled, it's not.
I know. You know, in Oklahoma,
It's a safe.
If only we could keep deputy director.
Sitting right side.
Yeah, you knew not to sit on that.
You know,
It's the last week. As it was
That's one or the other.
manually, but it's doing it without.
So I'll go ahead and I'll talk through it?
Yeah.
Okay. So, our methodology from Perkins is a little bit different, but we're gonna run it, it's better because it's check and balance, right? So, the methodology that we use. Well, it's better to have two, yeah. So, not gonna- So Perkins is incredibly project specific, and what we do is we call out the building. So we grab every building constructed, in this case since 2012, that is remotely similar to what we might be doing. And we throw it into a database, and you can see Walter has a list up there. We identify whether they're addition, renovation, new, repair, elementary, middle, and high school. So once we've done that data mine, and so what we do is go into the MSBA's data and we extract the direct building costs. So the site work has huge variables across the different buildings and projects. So we really just boil it down to what the building costs. And then from there, we can find out what the average cost per building type is. Thanks, Gavin. And we can plot it out over what year that project made it through the MSBA's board of directors meeting. It's a hard date, and from there, they all go into full design, and then after that, about a year later, they're out to bid. So we drop it into the MSBA board date, and then we can escalate out using market history escalation factors. So you can see across the top there. Right now, we've been tracking 5% annually for the past several years. The market did spike around 2015. We were seeing in excess of 6%. Those numbers there come from Williams. They're a national estimating firm. They release a publication really quarterly. So we take their data and then we drop in the project's building costs as to when it was approved, and then we push that forward to when Easton would appear in front of the MSBA board, which is the end of next year. So the cell that was highlighted in front of me is what it cost when it was presented to the board back in 2013, 2019, whenever it went through. And the next column over is the estimated cost using the market escalation factors. And it pulls it into essentially apples to apples comparison with what we're making at, based on Easton's current schedule. From there, we can boil the data down to the bottom, and we can extract an average cost per square foot, direct building cost, for each of the types. And you can see the three on the right that are circled. I would read that to all, but the one on the far left is the repair. There aren't a whole lot of repairs in the MSBA system because usually it doesn't make a lot of financial sense. Most of the time, if you see a repair go through, it's because either they don't have the space or the building is historically significant somewhere or another. The second bar there that you see at $343 a square foot is the new construction average, and then on the right side is the ad reno average. Obviously, ad renos can vary greatly, but fortunately, there's a lot of data, so the law of numbers applies that we're going to extract a fairly accurate ad reno. But that is very specific to each building.
Sorry, it's probably worth pointing out, just reminding everyone that the repair for the cost does not meet the educational goals or objectives. Yep.
Square footage.
Or square footage.
It's just fixing.
So that's building the raw data that we're going to use to drive the numbers across Easton scenarios, and then we can drop it in. So across each column represents a different scenario. The can't really read those too well. So the green area is that's a little bit.
Better.
So the first green section is the combined enrollment options. So there's an ad rental in there, new construction at 7, new construction at Park View. What we do is we take the square footages that are given to us by Perkins and we drop them in, and then that multiplies out by the cost per square foot that we just extrapolated from the MSBA's 50 or so projects worth of data. That gives us the direct building costs, and then from there we can adjust up and down based on different site variables. So yellow sections are the ones that really need a bit more detail working through the wastewater treatment plant, the septic systems, traffic, demolition, abatement. Need to get a better handle on those. So we have plug numbers in there that are really kind of a shot from the hip, but that's the biggest movement that we're going to see as we work through this process in this format. Below that, you have your site work numbers. Again, very, very variable, and they'll be fine-tuned as we get into each of the different site options, but generally speaking, we are carrying actually 12% for renovation and repairs, and site work is calculated as a percentage of direct building costs. That's an important one because the MSBA caps you at 8% of your direct building costs. Anything over 8% is ineligible. The MSBA will tell you that 8% is an unrealistic number, even for a downtown, middle of the city type of project. 8% is almost an impossible number. So new construction tends to be a bit more site work because most of the time you have a building that's being demolished and you have a big hole to fill, and then you kind of basically build that hole up from scratch and end up with parking fields or subsurface infiltration or whatever it might be on the site. So then the next big variable that we get into is the construction methodology. So on a new construction project, 99% of the time we would recommend going with a lump sum form of bid. It's easy for Perkins to develop a set of plans, bring them to 100%, put it out the street to pre-qualified bidders, and then we accept all this. Pretty straightforward. When we get into an occupied phased renovation of a building, we need to then account for additional variables. There's another procurement method that's available to us, CM at risk, which is a qualification-based selection. The unfortunate part of that is that when you go qualification-based selection, you're not going to get the most competitive price. So here we account for that premium associated with the CM at risk project. Generally speaking, you're not going to go with a lump sum bid in an occupied phase renovation just because there's way too many moving variables. You have a lot more flexibility with the CM at risk contract. You can tuck away holds and allowances for unknown scope. You have a lot more ability to leave the contract a little more open-ended so that you can react to changes as they come your way in unforeseen conditions so that you maintain your model date. So from there, you have your standard markups, your bonds and insurance, and then we get down to contingencies, and they're a little bit higher contingencies carried on a renovation project. You have, again, more. It's not a big number. It's 3% is the premium there, so really not huge. Some might actually argue that might be a little bit higher. So from contingencies, we can move down even further. Soft costs. The MSBA locks in soft costs, so the fees for OPM, for architect, the furniture numbers, really all fixed by the MSBA, and they cap that at 20% of your construction costs. Anything above that is not reimbursable for the MSBA. We don't really see any of our projects come in over that 20%, and I can't get one. So the 20% is usually a safe number to hold. You don't want to undershoot the 20% because if you undershoot it and then you end up, so say you carry 18%, and something comes up unexpected. Historical Commission says that there might be some archaeological significance in the ground, and all of a sudden you're back at 20%. You must be able to pay for that 2% because you've already bought into it. So better always just carry the 20% and then hopefully you underrun it. Then we get into modulars and swing space, and this is a big one because it's not reimbursable. So a base repair where we have to vacate the entire building is a bit different from an ad reno. We might be able to put an addition on, move students in the addition, and then do the renovation portion afterwards. So right now those are high level plug numbers. So I think worst case scenario, we have $2 million, and $2 million buys around modular trailers. $1 million, of course, half done off. But if you are using your own building as swing space, there's an opportunity, depending on the final solution, that number could be brought down to a little bit more. Perfect scenario, you get rid of that number in its entirety. New construction options, swing space is an issue because the students stay where they are. And then, very bottom of the form, we get into construction contingencies. So we recommend on a new construction project that we carry 5% on an ad rental. Again, higher risk, higher chance for unknowns. We typically carry 7%. And so really, it's a math exercise. You run all those numbers through and all the variables, and it brings you to a bottom line number. And you can see that there's quite a range there. The base repair options are trending. So one's at 26 million for just center, and then what are the other two at all? They're pretty close. So 26 and 33 million. Just multiplying all by the cost per square foot, using the state averages. As Bob had said earlier, this is something where we cannot demonstrate that these satisfy the educational program, we get 100% of the district. So that plays in that. We'll take 3 of those at almost $30 million, and you're $90 million right there, 100% of district cost. Whereas on the new combined solution, right now, and again, very, very early, this is the first shot at it, it's $95 million for the new construction option on our new site, up to $190 million for the addition renovation. One thing that can sway that number and balance those out is if there's a way to relocate the students. If we can relocate the students, we can reduce the construction duration, which cuts down on general conditions, general requirements, and it even opens the door to go to a traditional lump sum sign bid build procurement methodology. So in the towns and districts where we have been able to do that, it typically balances out the ad revenue and construction. They come in pretty close. Then what really tips the scale is the MSBA will provide some reimbursement incentive on the amount of the building that you renovate. And the way that works is it's prorated. It's a maximum of 5 percentage points. But they look at the square footage of renovated versus the overall square footage of the building. You can see there that Perkins right now on that one, I think that's about 39,000 square feet.
The entire park of the school.
Okay. So if we take that as a percentage and prorate it over the 5 percentage points, there's about 2 points on the table right there. So the next step, once now that we have this data, and once we get the more defined numbers in the wastewater treatment plant, the septic systems, traffic, we can then take the different MSBA variables in their guidelines and really isolate items that are ineligible for reimbursement and factor in and try to figure out what the district share might look like for each of those scenarios. So right now we're here, and this is this order of magnitude total construction costs. Next time we meet, we'll be looking at order of magnitude district share for each of these options. Want to walk through the methodology and see if there are any questions.
So obviously the costs can fluctuate, but can we make an assumption that the difference between them will pretty much stay the same? Like they'll all
That they're
fluctuate around the
Yes,
same?
that's kind of
As we
that's kind of the idea of it. Is that
Okay.
no matter what, it could be it's one plus whatever, one plus
For
the
all
next,
of them?
and then they'll change, but they'll all change in a very
So
similar.
it's not
way.
like one is all of a sudden, the most expensive could become the least expensive, it's not gonna do that.
I'm very unlikely.
So it looks like the two combined addition renovation projects actually cost more than a combined new school in either situation.
As a total project budget,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, because you'll be going with the construction manager on those two, that's what we would recommend, that's gonna drive up some of that cost, and then you're gonna be additional space.
I just think for the average person, I think, you presume that an addition and a renovation on something is going to be less expensive. I know you explained a lot of the reasons why with the swing space and site prep and all that, but I think the average person might be surprised about that.
I have a question. We also added a lot of square footage here, these buildings are small, so you're not really getting as much of.
It's not your typical addition, you're not putting
It's
on
a
a
big
room on your
addition.
house, you're like adding another house to your house.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you factor the cost for a new school at Parkview, entirely new school, not addition renovation, did you carry cost of demolition of the old school?
So we actually carry it
Right there.
So the abatement cost stays the same across all scenarios, right? We're in that building, we have to abate, that's step one, no matter what we do. And then the demolition cost does vary a little bit. Selective demolition of a space is gonna cost you more than bulk demolition. So it's easier to take bulldozer, haul it up trucks, but
Harder to do that.
Yep, exactly.
I think on top of that, the new option at Parkview and the new option at Center only take into account demolishing the opposite site and do not take into account Murrow Hall either.
Okay.
So if it's at Parkview, that's taken into account demolishing Parkview.
So the one item that would totally skew the numbers is magically there's all of a sudden some place to put students and we could vacate one of those buildings and then move forward. That will balance it out, but that's really the only scenario that we.
What's the time frame? How long would kids have to be displaced, do you know?
Just under 2 years. So we would, really school year, school year.
So 2 school years.
Two
Yeah.
school years?
It's a long time, with that whole time,
It's to pre-K,
It's
that's
3
their
years.
whole education.
yeah,
It's almost
2/3
their whole time.
of
3 years.
the time, and there will
First
be
and second.
But I think
hard.
the combined new at Parkview maintain existing school.
Yeah.
So that,
Nobody would be, there wouldn't be.
Yes. Right.
Just bulldoze those.
Get softball fields back.
I think they have like lotteries where people can,
They'll push the trailer.
So in that scenario, if you used it as swing space, the kids who are currently in Parkview School would stay while you built a way that they could go into. So it really would be, those kids would be in that part of the school. Then when the school is complete, there'd be an opening of the whole town.
Exactly.
So there'd be kids in that school before it really officially
Correct.
opened as.
If we were to do an ad run out, is that right?
Yeah,
Yeah, those tend to be a little bit longer, so a new construction can happen in really 18 to 20 months.
okay,
In ad reno, you're gonna go school year, you're gonna move the students, and
Yeah.
you're gonna be another by half a year after.
Right.
So it's trending about 6 months.
So that's part of, so there's a phasing, 3% premium in there, and that's for the additional time that it takes, just from, we have to move the students during those breaks. Really shoot for summer or.
Right.
December.
right, because you have to consider the quality of those kids. Like you said, that's their whole,
They're in a construction area,
Right.
the whole education.
right,
Important
And then-
time.
right. They don't do first grade.
so the combined new outweighs the savings of renovating the existing space, the actual point you would get for renovating.
So that's the next scenario, having done it a few dozen times, it definitely will, but we'll have exact numbers right on it. So it's, it will bump the reimbursement rate, so eligible costs, your rate will bump by 2%.
Right.
But,
But the cost for the combined new may be 5% less.
right,
So-
yeah, exactly, yep.
One of the things it's showing, it's showing me is that the ad renos and the news are neck and neck. So there doesn't appear to be
Yeah.
a real significant savings in renovating the building. And that's usually where communities start.
Right.
They want to, that's a selling point, though, we're gonna keep the building, we're
Right.
gonna renovate it, we're gonna save it. There doesn't appear to be here because of the building size and what you'll need to do it. There doesn't appear to be that.
I think the renovation piece, the combined ad reno, even though it seems like, you know, they're gonna be in the existing school, and then they just move over into the new piece. It never works out that way. It's not that simple.
No, if you miss
We
dates,
did the high
it's probably
school.
becomes very problematic.
Yeah, we doubled the size of the high school, there was always issues with that. It's not as simple as it seems.
Well, especially where the. What's the part you're doing? Are you doing pre-KK first?
Right.
And then you're moving pre-K to 2 into that space? It's not even an appropriate space for half of your kids? Yeah,
You
that
may have
would be
space built
complicated.
out a little bit differently,
Yeah,
and
that'd
have to
be
go back and make adjustments to that space, we could use it as temporary learning space.
a lot more disruption for everyone.
Right.
They usually are.
Yeah.
So
Question?
next time we meet, we'll go through and we'll call out MSB ineligibles and we'll try to pinpoint what the anticipated grant amount might be in each scenario. We'll tie it back and send you check it on an MSB budget form and call it for a letter. And then from there, we will have the district share approximation. It'll balance out the ad run a little bit because of that incentive on the reimbursement. I don't think it's gonna totally wash it out here because there's so little of existing building. It's just too small of a percentage. But still, it's certainly worthwhile.
Can I just clarify, if it was a combined new, the kids could stay in Parkview while it wouldn't be that, that's the piece, okay.
Yeah, they'd be impacted only because they are on the construction site, so they'll be built on.
Absolutely,
So
but
there'll
we
be some
wouldn't have to
impact
find
there,
a space
but
for
they wouldn't
kids
have
if
to
it was a
go
new.
anywhere.
Be the least impact.
Yeah.
Right, they would, they're still in their school.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be living
Of all
They
the
would have
scenarios,
right.
the least impact
Yeah.
for children.
I'm sorry, what?
Yes.
Of all the scenarios, it's the least
Yeah.
impact for children.
Wow.
And it's also the shortest, did I hear that
18
correctly?
months, right,
It's
is
the
the
shortest
shortest
time
instruction
frame.
Yeah.
The other piece about the base repairs, and Chad and I discussed this quite a bit, as the 36,000 square feet at Center School and the 39 at Parkview and the 30 at Monroe Hall. Again, the base repairs are simply just fixing the square footage and the issues you have with overcrowding and the square footage that you don't have aren't included in those numbers at all. And if you do include them in there, you do add up those, incur those costs as well. But to satisfy the MSBA, we need to keep it as a base repair only.
So we have base repair for center, and then over at the end, you had Monroe and Parkview, right? If I recall? Yep, thank you.
And what we did on Monroe and Parkview, I think you explained this, Chad, but we carried a 5-year escalation.
No, I didn't. Oh, it's a good point. So, those two buildings, and I don't know if they can both be done 5 years after Parkview, one of them might be 10 years old. So we really would map that out. But we know that there's no chance you're gonna vacate all three buildings at the same time and renovate and repair all three. It's just not realistic, so it's. Yep, exactly. So, I mean, maybe one can get going in 4 years and the other one happens in 6 years. Whatever it is, right now the assumption is that both of them would happen on an average 5 years.
It took us 7 to get this one, so yeah, approved.
And that's how difficult it is. So 150 projects a year and around 20 total, so 7 years is difficult.
Is there any idea how to define whether, if you want to combine new, the building space is allocated, students could stay at Parkview and one of the new ones could go. How would the play space be impacted due to construction?
It absolutely is impacted. That's
To what extent would there basically be null and void play space?
That area in the back right now, in the scenario that.
Yeah, so it's softball. Yeah, you lose the softball field. So there's definitely gonna be a
considerable
impact to the field.
Play space is
But you would probably still be able to retain the hardscape on the side of
Yeah.
Parkview and possibly
Around
even
it.
the.
That soccer field,
Yes.
that's a leaching field, that could be
Yeah.
impacted, so that would only be
That's
green
always
green
remaining.
space, so that's
So-
always gonna be available.
That's still.
So overall, it's still the least impactful.
Right.
The building isn't impacted, kids are impacted a little on play space.
Right.
They can deal with
Not education. Recreation.
It also has.
Be no worse than what they have here.
Observing about that, those trucks and stuff. Kids would love that.
Yeah.
Over shades. Go out and watch the construction.
Yeah, there's an opportunity there, right?
Project based.
Right.
No.
So you don't have to set up touch a truck anymore, just do it on their way to the bus.
So any other questions or comments or items that we need to be considering before we adjourn? And I just want to confirm our next meeting is next Wednesday, is that correct? The 19th at 6 o'clock. Questions? Nothing? We're good? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So,
Second? All in favor? Thank you.